Look, good morning. Namaste. Group hug. Come join me on the sofa. Today, I welcome Rainier Zitelmann, and he is an author, historian, sociologist, and a very successful businessman in the real estate sector. Citywealth is talking to him today about his book, The Rich in Public Opinion. Before we start, Rainier, I just want to say to viewers, if you can press the thumbs up and if you can subscribe at the bottom of the video, then we will notify you next time, Tuesdays and Fridays, of our next guests who are coming to speak to us. So Rainier, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Welcome you from Berlin.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. I've had a read of your book, although I'm going to go back and read it properly now. And I have to say it's incredible and very insightful. So we will go through various points on that. But as we start, tell us about you, Rainier Zitelmann. Tell us about your life and who you are.
Yes, I will do. I'm an historian and a sociologist. And first I started as an assistant professor here at the University of Berlin. Then later on, I was a journalist, a colleague of you. I worked for one of the leading newspapers, daily newspapers, Die Welt. But then in 2000, I found my own company. It was a public relation company with a focus on real estate. So our clients were real estate companies, open-end funds, closed-end funds, listed companies. And I did it 15 years. And at the same time, I started to invest in real estate in Berlin. It was a great time for real estate investments here in Berlin. But
Was this before or after the Berlin Wall?
No, it was from 2000 to 2015. I invested here, and in 2000 it was very, very cheap to buy here real estate. And then later on it became very expensive, and I bought when it was cheap, and I sold when it was expensive. So this was a great time for investment. But I sold my company and I sold most of my real estate. And now I live as an author and scholar, writing my books, and especially traveling all over the world to have my lectures about my book, especially in China, Korea, United States, everywhere.
So we can put you as one of the rich that we can have a public opinion about, and you've already written your opinion, so we've got you. So an interesting thing we've had in the UK, just very quickly, was Brexit. And I think I've been in media all my life at News International, and it's quite an experience. People don't realise that everyone in the media is an alumni, like we all know each other. So it's a very interesting world when you're in the media. But you've mentioned Mauri Polls, which is MORI, which a lot of readers may not know. But you know, and I know, and they almost shape how newspapers are, don't they? They provide reports every day on what people are thinking, what they bought, what the readers thought of your newspapers. And one of the things that people don't know in the UK is when we had Brexit was they were like, oh, they went crazy about immigration and the NHS. But in fact, when you look at the Mauri polls from 20 or 30 years ago, the only thing that they ever said really, really got the public out of bed was NHS and immigration. So it's a never-ending cycle of, if you want to incite a riot in the people, constantly put in the media issues about immigration and NHS. So it's like a tactic almost that perhaps you have an insight on.
I'm not sure whether I got your question. So, my poll was about the attitude towards rich people that I commissioned. And it was, in Germany, it was another institute as it was in UK and United States. And what we wanted to know, what people think about rich people. And this was the first international survey that was done with identical questions so that we can compare the attitude in these different countries about rich people. This is what we have done.
I guess what I'm saying is that actually these questions never change through decades. it looks like a new topic, but in fact, the Mauri Poll shows us, if you look back historically, that these are always the questions that people think about. So they're like a kind of Gucci handbag. They're what people always want to know. It's not a new question, but it's clearly a very interesting question.
No, sorry, I disagree, because I saw all the older polls in different countries, and you had different questions in different countries. But the special thing with this poll is that we had the same questions in 4 countries, so that we can compare the attitude, because we had the same questions in Germany, in France, in the United States, and in UK. And these were some dozens of different questions, how people really think about the rich.
Which we will come on in just a minute. But let's, first of all, as you're a clever person and you're living in Berlin and we don't have any insight on Berlin, give us your work from home situation and a bit of a download on Berlin and tell us what's going on there.
Yes, as far as I'm concerned, nothing changed so much, because I'm used to work at home. I love it to work at home. So this Corona crisis wasn't a big change in my own life, but of course, for a lot of other people, it was. But now everything's changing here. Everything's getting better. And I think a lot of people, maybe it's a little bit dangerous. They think the coronavirus is all gone and it's not dangerous anymore. You know, we had not this very bad situation that we saw in TV in Italy or in UK or in New York or in France. In Germany, we never had this bad situation with these hospitals. But sure, we watched here TV and we saw what happened in other countries, and everyone was here very afraid that we will get the same situation. And so we had this lockdown here in Germany and in Berlin. But now there are, I think, every day only around 300 new infections in Germany, in whole Germany, with coronavirus, only 300.
Yeah.
And so most of the people, I have a little bit fear that they underestimate it now, because it's like life is getting not exactly like it was before, but it's getting more and more as it was before the coronavirus.
Well, I think that Germany has ended up, and I know Berlin is not Germany, but they have ended up being a kind of role model, poster boy, haven't they, for a successful take on coronavirus and how to deal with it. But I deal a lot with the wealth market, and one thing I do know is there's a very embedded connection between the Germans and the Chinese, which people do not often understand, and it is born of white goods manufacturing. But that connection has obviously given the Germans some, well, I'm assuming some massive insight, hasn't it, into how to immediately deal with manufacturing and how to immediately address this problem of COVID.
Yes, for me, it was the first time. I remember it was in the beginning of March. I got an email from a friend of mine. He's based in Shanghai. And he warned me and he told me, I think you underestimate absolutely what happens here with the coronavirus. He wrote me, I think you are very naive here in Europe, and it will become much worse than you thought before. And for me, it was the first warning signal. I published his email, and I think more than 100,000 people read his email after this, because for me, it was the first time that I saw, because first everyone told us, it's harmless, it's like a flu, what happens every year. And then later on, we saw all these pictures, especially from Italy.
Yes, I agree. I think the Chinese, well, they had SARS, didn't they? And the Arab states had MERS. So they definitely had a take on us, didn't they? Which was a much quicker response rate than we understood in Europe. But moving on, one of the reasons we're talking to you today is your book, which we will show everyone, which is a very big printed book, which is in these days very rare, isn't it? Because it's incredibly expensive to produce these books, isn't it? So give us a quick talk on the book and why you you say that you pushed through. I read in some of your content which said that people told you, no, don't do this because no one will be interested. But you pushed through and decided to publish anyway, which I think is the spirit of an entrepreneur, actually, isn't it? Like people say, don't do it because it's rubbish, but actually you just do it anyway. And you can make it become a reality. So why did you push through on it?
Yes, it's a good question. There are two reasons. First of all, I saw there are hundreds or no thousands of books or scientific essays in journals about prejudice and stereotypes, prejudice against black people, against gay people, against other minority, against poor people. There are even books about prejudice against overweighted people, but there was not a single book prejudice against rich people. And so this was something I was interested as a scholar to write the first book about this subject. And why do I think that it is important? It was an experience for me. For example, here in Berlin, we had demonstrations, and on this first May demonstration, I saw posters with "Kill Your Landlord." And in this moment when I saw these posters with "Kill Your Landlord," you know, I am a landlord. I thought for a moment, how would be the reaction if there would be a poster like "Kill Black people" or "Kill gay people"? I think everyone would be rightly outraged and shocked about this. But so with killing landlords or to kill rich people, it seems okay. I think you had it as well in the financial crisis in London. I saw there bankers hanged there on a lampet and so on. And so I think with there's a difference between the rich that I see as well as a minority and all other minorities, because the rich people, this is the only group you are allowed to speak very, very negative and even with hate speech without any negative response
barrier,
that you will get if you speak about other minorities.
So in a way, people would say you are rich and they would say I am rich because I have a business and you have a real estate business. When in fact, as a business person, it's an incredible struggle day in, day out to keep things in the air, to keep staff employed in a way they wish to be employed, and employment regulations and taxes. It's a very, very big struggle and risk, which many people do not want to undertake, or if they do, and startup culture is now massive, is they cannot get through the first or second years because of the sheer sweat it takes to get something through to 10 years, 5 years, 15 years is more than anyone will want to sacrifice in their lives. So how do you, as a considered author on this topic, how do you define a rich person?
Yes, it's also a good question, because there were some polls and they asked, what do you think about rich people? But everyone has another understanding what rich means. There was another poll and there was a range from meaning rich. It started with maybe someone earning £3,000 a month and to someone having more than $100 billion. So it's a wide range and everyone has a different opinion. And so
that's really here, isn't it? Like there's no drop point on that. That's massively different.
And we wanted that everyone has a similar association with rich. And so in our poll, we had the statement, rich people are people who own more than £1 million or dollar, except the worth of their own building. For example, if you live in your own house, this is without your house. But in addition to this, you have at least $1 million or pound or euros. This was our definition for rich people.
So in the UK, a definition of the rich was in 1970, it was if you have £1 million or dollars above your lifestyle, which is what you're saying. But latterly, in the Sunday Times and Times Rich list 5 years ago, they said now, because of inflation, you have to have $7 million or pounds or euros above your lifestyle. So that's actually a definition that has
Sure,
become alive in the last 5 years. So
yes,
just
sure, absolutely, you're right. For me, for example, no one is rich with 1 million. I had here this other book. Maybe I can show you, The Wealth
yeah.
Elite. This was my second doctoral dissertation, and for this doctoral dissertation, I had the definition that someone had to have at least 10, 10 million. Most of them had between 30 million and 1 billion, and there were some
Right.
multi-billionaires. So this was my definition here. But okay, only for the survey, for the poll, we had to find something where people could agree. And so we had this: rich people are their own house or own apartment in addition to this 1 million. But sure, there is no, if you ask me,
Exact
no one is
definition,
rich
yeah.
with 1 million. And I can tell you why no one is rich with my 1 million, in my opinion. For example, if you have 1 million, and even if you get 3% after taxes, what is not so easy today with safe investments like government bonds, so you get zero yield. But let's assume you get 3% after taxes. That would mean 30,000 a year or 2,500 a month. And this is not like rich people want to live. So in my opinion, no one is rich with 1 million. But for this survey, we had this definition for all countries the same. And so we could compare what people think about rich people.
So it's a kind of a movable feast, isn't it? Where we're all not entirely sure. We know what it means on social media. It means the Kardashians, I think. But do we actually know what it means? I'm not sure that people do. But so talking about the data, let's talk about the book and how you built the data, because we've just done a chat there about what actually is a rich person. But for me, I've been building Citywealth business in the States, and obviously I'm a London, UK business. I'm saying that obviously the viewers might not know. But for me, what's been quite a stark, interesting dynamic has been the USA. There's an incredible amount of wealth in the Black community in the States. It is a much bigger market. It is like China, which is 1.5 billion residents. But the historic context, I think, is that in the war, Europe lost one generation of wealth. So the USA has never had that situation. So they are like one generation ahead in success of people, whatever their race or creed. And it's very stark when I go to whatever place I go to, Seattle, New York, Washington, DC, there is an incredibly affluent, successful Black community that we somehow have not replicated in Europe. So I'm just wondering, how in your book, how do you make that data relevant when we are, I think in my head, a generation behind an incredibly successful economic output in the USA and the UK or Europe?
So it was not about distinction with race of millionaires, but by the way, I think it's right what you say. In this days where we have a lot of talk about racism in the United States, I think we talk not much enough about these positive examples of rich Black people who made their way, like Oprah Winfrey, for example, was the first self-made billionaire in the world. I think today she has estimated net worth of 2.7 billion, and she came from a poor family, and she made their way. And I think I think it would be good to speak more, not only about the negative things. You have to speak about the negative things, but you have to speak as well about these positive examples. And this is much more true for Asian Americans, for example. If you see the income pyramid in the United States, you have the Black people, Latin people, white people, and Asian people earning 40% more than white people, because they are so ambitious and so hungry, and I think they are good role models. But this was not a topic of my book. What I wanted to do, I wanted to compare the attitude in different countries, and especially one important topic is the envy the envy against rich
Yeah, very
people.
interesting. Yeah.
And yes, and we had a lot of questions. And envy is not that you want to um, close the gap to someone by improving your own situation, but by taking something away from wealthy people. So, for example, we had one question. It was, would you support it that one should tax millionaires very, very high, even if you have no advantage as a person? And this is something envy. You want to worsen the situation of someone else, even if it does nothing positive for you. Or we had another question. It was the Schadenfreude question. It was when I hear that a millionaire loses a lot of money due to a risky business, I think it serves him right. This is like Schadenfreude. And we had a lot of questions this way.
So just for the viewers, explain what Schadenfreude is, because it's a German term.
I think it's in English as well. Yes, if you have fun about someone doing bad. Yes.
Okay.
If you are happy because someone is unhappy, for example, in this way, someone loses a lot of money and he lost a lot of money. I'm happy.
You're
about
glad.
This. And so we had all these questions, and then we saw that there were three groups. The one group we called the social envious, people with a lot of social envy. The other group we called the non-envious, people without or with not so much envy. Then there was a group between we called the ambivalence. And then we could compare the different countries. And for this book, I calculated something that I called the social envy coefficient. And this means the ratio between envious and non-envious people in every country. To make it a little bit easier, maybe the higher the number is, the more envious is a country. And if we compare, the highest number with 1.21 was in France, with people being in France most envious. Then was Germany with 0.97, and then was United States with only 0.42, much less envious, and then UK with only 0.37. So I like very much British people because they're sure there are, like everywhere in the world, there are envious people, but not so much as we have in France, for example, and in Germany. This was one important result.
So one of the things that I know culturally is people call that the evil eye. Do you know this? So they don't call it envy or jealousy, they call it the evil eye. And it's very real, actually, in the Arab states, which we are not discussing because that's not an area you've covered geographically. But one of the things I find, which is connected to French and sort of French colonialism, is that people feel that as a very real topic, which is the evil eye, which is the same thing, isn't it? Jealousy and envy. And that people are very careful not to attract the evil eye. And actually in the Arab states, they do many tithe situations, which is giving money to people who are their staff, which in its way says you're rich. But they are very aware of that as a concept, which I think in a way in the Western states we've moved away from, haven't we? We've gone more logical of thinking, for a little bit Germanic in the Western states, where we don't think that's a real concept anymore. But I do think that's a real thing. But moving on, unless you wanted to comment on that, I'm going to move on to the Panama Papers.
There was one thing that I wanted to add was very important for me. Even now you see it in the Corona crisis. In every crisis in history, we saw that people were looking for scapegoats, especially if they didn't understand the real reason or causes of the crisis. It was in the Middle Age, when they killed between 40,000 and 60,000 women in Europe as witches, or later on they blamed Jewish people for the plague or for any crisis. And then it was in every crisis. Last time, financial crisis, 2008, 2009, it was the greedy banker, the greedy manager. People look always for scapegoats.
Somebody,
and today, rich people are scapegoats. You see it even in the corona crisis. For a lot of people, for example, Bill Gates is the scapegoat. And I don't understand, because there's no one who did so much against poverty in the world as Bill Gates with his donation. But in spite of this fact, people blame him now as being responsible. What's a crazy idea? For the corona crisis, they have this crazy conspiracy theories that he want to make a lot of more money with selling vaccines to the people or whatever. This is only one example that people look always for scapegoats, and we had one scapegoating question, and this was the question we asked: do you think that the super rich who want more and more power are responsible for all this crisis in the world, especially humanitarian or financial crisis? And this was an interesting result. For example, in Germany, 50% of the people thought super rich people are responsible for all this crisis. If I compare with your country, UK, only 21% agreed with this question. So you see this scapegoating. Sure, it exists in every country, but it's much, much more in Germany, where I'm living, as in UK. This was one other result of our poll.
We will come on to big megastars, and I think that will be our social media slot, where we have a look at the tech companies and how they are dominating the world, and probably dominating this topic a little bit by the media. But first, let's get on to the Panama Papers. So you have a big section in your book about this, and this and media in the private wealth industry. And it was a really interesting reaction from the Panama Papers. First of all, congratulations to the media industry for doing some good investigative journalism on Mossack Fonseca, whatever they did, whether that be good, bad, or ugly, and how they approached it. But they did make revelations which caused catastrophic effects for politicians in Iceland. They did make revelations which made people say, well, a bit like James Bond movies, why do people have boxes with gold in it? You know, aren't they African, to stereotype, of course, African politicians who've stolen money, or, you know, and it was a list of the great and the good. But the industry I serve is the private wealth industry, who serve, in essence, the rich, however they are defined. And I found, as an independent observer, very interesting that the industry immediately said, it's data theft. So our problem is with the journalists who have stolen our data and created this situation. And I said, well, as the media looking in, my problem is that's not the real problem. The real problem is now perception that your industry is serving what is being perceived as a very dodgy, I don't know if you know that word in Berlin or German, but criminal kind of behavior or people. And that's how you're being connected by the public opinion, which is therefore different dynamics. The fact that you had Panama Papers with the media spending years doing army style surveillance. You had the wealth industry saying, well, they were thieves themselves because they stole the data. And then you had the general public going, OMG, criminal activity has been allowed to happen by the private wealth industry, and now we've discovered it. And then you have the media who curate, like an art gallery, what they want people to believe. So you have a very good take on this in your book.
Yes, for me, the main problem is not, sure, they stole the data, but this is not my main point. It's also something you can discuss about, and you should discuss it, but this is not my main problem. My main problem is, it's true that all these criminals that you mentioned, from mafia or Africa, dictators, and so on, that they have this kind of letterboxes. But it's not true the other way around, that everyone who has such a letterbox is someone who did something illegal or even not something morally suspect. And this is what I didn't
Which is
like.
how the media is curating it, isn't it? That's
Yes.
what sells newspapers, is the curation of that topic.
Yes, exactly. And this is what I didn't like in this discussion, the generalization, yes, that there was no differentiation. Most people, they don't know about letterboxes and what it is. And if you have an article, and in this article, there are a lot of examples about mafia people and criminals, and then you mix it all with rich and super rich people, you get a false impression. And I think it's a task of serious journalism to differentiate and not to generalize. And this is what I didn't like, that they speak about the super rich as paying not their taxes. Sure, there are super rich people who don't pay taxes, like there are a lot of other people who don't pay taxes, who maybe have their housekeeping women and so on and don't tax it. There are a lot of people who don't pay taxes. But it's not only a problem of rich people. And I will give you a parallel to make my point. You remember the terrorist attacks from Islamic terrorists. And after every attack, we could hear in TV, please don't generalize, not every Muslim is a terrorist, what is absolute true. And journalists warned you, please don't generalize it. And it's really true, yes, that most Muslims are people who even they hate terrorists and they have nothing to do with this. But after every case with rich people, with this Panama Papers and so on, when they mentioned then we had no warning, please don't generalize it. On the contrary, we had all this generalization that they say, now you see, this is the way how rich people are. They pay taxes and so on. For example, I'm rich and I have never had this kind of paying not my taxes. On the contrary, I paid so much taxes, and I know a lot of other rich people who pay their taxes month by month. And so I think you can understand, if I don't like it, that to generalize it, that the rich people are people who don't pay their taxes. And this is what I did not like in this discussion.
And I think that comes back to, doesn't it, how do you define a rich? How does each culture define the rich? And I think even in your book, you say, if you know a rich person or somebody you perceive as rich, you realize actually they're just a normal person, like your dad or your sister or your mom or your child.
Sorry, good that you mentioned,
Go
because
ahead.
I forgot this was an interesting point. We had this question in Germany. At first, we asked everyone, what do you think about personality traits of rich people? And most people mentioned things like greedy or materialistic or superficial or self-centered. And so this what was most people mentioned if we asked them about personality traits of the rich. And then we asked a smaller group, only those people who knew a millionaire in person. And then we asked them, what do you think about this person that you know in person? And then the people, for the countries, they said intelligent, optimistic, industrious, and so. And I think this is a structure of prejudice in general. If we don't know a group, if we don't know the people from our daily life, we have only some kind of fantasies about minority groups if we don't know. I remember it was a very funny interview I had in Germany with a leftist journalist. Leftist, or I'm not a leftist, yet another, but I liked him and he liked people. I think they are exactly the way like we know these people from the James Bond movies. This is what he said to me. And then I asked him, how many super rich people do you know? And he knew not only a single rich person, he knew them only from movies. And so and then I said to him, so this you see, there's a difference between you and me, because I know a lot of rich and super rich people, and you know them only from the movies. And so, you read the books for this reason. We had analysis as well, how rich people are portrayed in Hollywood movies, because I think this is the stuff where a lot of people have their prejudice or stereotypes about rich people.
Which moves us back to Bill Gates and onto social media. And the reality is that's the possibly phrasing it as a problem for Bill Gates. And the royal family in Britain or in other countries like Monaco have worked out, haven't they, that they need to go and be on the street and shake hands with people in the street so that they have a personal connection with them. But a lot of people like Bill Gates, who's ever met him? No one. So it is all smoke and mirrors, isn't it? Like a Hollywood movie, that they are just these super rich dudes who are probably a bit nerdy, who are making tons of cash, doing good, whatever they're doing. Nobody cares because they're not real, are they? And I think you mentioned that in your book as well, a bit like, how do we make them real in our heads? And I think the royal families, in a way, could give a lesson to the super rich, couldn't they, about actually just going down to the people, walking with them in the street, shaking their hand, which sounds a bit mad, but taking flowers from children, having some pictures, and it's making yourself real rather than this person who should be hated, perhaps.
It's a funny idea. I never thought about it, but maybe if Bill Gates could learn something from Princess Diana, for example, how she did it, yes, maybe it would be a funny idea, because she was absolutely perfect in doing these things like showing empathy with poor people and so. But if there is someone who has really hard negative stereotypes and prejudice against rich people, they can do whatever they like. They still will hate them. You see it with Bill Gates. You mentioned him is the best example. He did so much. He spent billions and billions to fight disease and to fight poverty. And how does this rich haters thank him today? They blame him for being responsible for coronavirus. What is absolutely a stupid idea. So what I want to mean, if someone has prejudice against any minority group, you can't convince him by any good deeds or good thing that you do. He always will turn it around, and it doesn't change his opinion.
Into negative publicity, which shifts us quickly onto social media, which is, I know, not your topic in the book, but I'd be interested in your opinion. And my opinion, as somebody who's worked in the traditional media, like the newspapers like the Allgemeine Zeitung, Frankfurter, or the Times, British newspapers, is there was a period of about 10 years where people were like, oh, there's social media influencers and they're very special. But now I see that the template for social media is very much replicating the media of the olden days. Free things which are not being discussed by social media influencers who are putting posts out saying, oh, this is a product, you should use it, not saying that they've just been posted a million loads of free things in the morning. But more than that, it's become a very big platform for protests. I'm sure you've seen Black Lives Matter.
That's sure.
And then we had White Lives Matter, whatever that means. And it's become a massive media operation, but very unregulated. And what I'm concerned about is that posting things is, in essence, what people don't understand about the media is that they are alive to commercial activities. They need advertisers. They need to create arguments and beefs, as you would say on social media, to create commercial activity. And the Mauri Poll and its success is alive to the fact that there's competition between the different platforms, as there was between the Telegraph and the Sunday Times. if you can create more arguments in the Times, more people read it, you get more advertising. The same with the Telegraph. So there's like a sort of commercial war going on. And I see that that may develop with social media. So how with the rich, if the people who are getting rich from social media are just Bill Gates or the guy who owns LinkedIn, who I forget for a moment, if we're just creating this superpower of rich white guys in Silicon Valley, how do these two things interact in this new world?
I think it has two sides. On the one hand, social media have a lot of did a lot of positive things to connect us, and in the beginning, everyone has had hope that we got will be much better informed, well informed. But today we see at the same time we are much better disinformed as well. And I think these are two sides of a coin, but they are there, and I see no alternative. If the state would start to regulate them very hard and to tell them what is allowed to do there or not, I think it's not a good alternative. It can become very quick to censorship. But I think it's a question of education of the users. That what you mentioned, I can absolutely agree that most people they don't understand the mechanism how it works, and they are not educated how to use social media. If you use them well, you can, and if you have to learn, like you have learned as a journalist, how to use sources and to distinguish between facts and opinions and so then you can use it. But most of the people, they don't know it, and today you see it with this conspiracy theories, crazy conspiracy theories. You have them all in the media. For example, here in Germany, we had one video watched by millions of people. It was Bill Gates conquers Germany. Yes, it was absolutely crazy video, but millions of people saw it, and there are.
So I didn't see that. So what do you want to explain to viewers what it was?
Yes, the content was that Bill Gates is now the ruler of, with his wife, of the whole world, and especially in Germany. And he bought all the media, and he bought all other institutions and politicians, and he's the real ruler of the world, and he want to make his something they call the new world order, and this is very dangerous. And we had here a lot of these demonstrations in Berlin with people having posters with give AIDS no chance. It was like, maybe you remember the slogan, give AIDS no chance. And so they changed it now in give Gates no chance, like Bill Gates to compare it with AIDS, for example. Yes, it's a result, this conspiracy theories that are really crazy. This is, I think, traditional media, you can find not so often this very crazy conspiracy theories, but in social media you can find it. But anyway, I use it as well. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter. You have to use it today, and yes.
So we're going to move on to your other books that you've written, which you're an accomplished author. But I would like to ask your opinion on the death tolls that I've been interested in. That the start of the COVID, which I think was about March the 18th, that it seemed to be normalized in the UK that every day, every media, including the BBC, said, well, 300,000 people died, you know. And that was almost like a kind of crowd control, or like a sort of, you better shut up about any opinion about anything you've got about how we're running this, because this is a figure and that's real. And we had no analysis of that figure. And I don't know how that was in other countries. I had a very big concern that numbers of death is very hard to quantify if you don't have any research on the deaths. Where are they appearing? You know, what age group? And I don't want to stereotype older people, because I thought that was really bad news, telling people in certain age groups, you know, it's you who's going to get it. but I felt very concerned that we were all living by this number every day that was coming up on the news and the media, which is part of what you're saying about Bill Gates. And we had another one, which was we had a 5G conspiracy here. Seems to
Yes,
be
yes,
similar to your Bill Gates.
I heard about it as well. So this so many crazy things. But I want to speak more if you suggested it to another book because I want to tell you something about something that maybe could be interesting in this context where we're talking today. I mentioned today this doctoral dissertation. For me, this was the first book in English that was published from me, The Wealth Elite. And this was interesting because now we spoke in this interview about the attitude of the population towards rich people. But this dissertation was about another topic. It was about the psychology of rich people, about their personality traits. Because I wondered, there was almost no scientific study about this personality traits of super rich people. It's crazy. You can find doctoral dissertations about almost anything, even about the heartbeat of a pig during a 100-meter race. That's true. We had there was a doctoral thesis about the love life of rare insects, or about the atmosphere of planet Venus and everything. But the but how to get rich, what is very interesting for a lot of people, how to grow rich and what is necessary, what attitudes and what personality traits. I don't know why, but scholars were not interested in this. And so I took the opportunity and I had this interviews. I spoke with 45 rich people, which with everyone between 1 and 2 hours. In the end, I had 1,700 pages with transcriptions, and I analyzed it to find out what do they have in common about their biography, about their attitude, and especially about their personality traits. And in addition to this, everyone everyone did the psychological or filled the psychological test. So this was another very interesting topic for me. And the other book we spoke today, it was only the follow up to this first book.
Yeah, well, now that we've done an interview with you, if you will get a note and make sure people have got an example to have a look at those and read what you're saying. And I've had a look through the Rich in Public Opinion, and it's on the surface you look through and you think, but when you delve into it, incredibly interesting insights. So what's your advice, and what do you think is going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years? We in the private wealth industry, we have a lot of reputation management. And in my head, I think a lot of celebrities and people with money have really got a bad step out of line on what the public think about them. And I think it's become very obvious during this COVID crisis that they are responding in the way they've always responded and realizing they're falling down a pit of very negative public opinion about showing themselves in glamorous clothes and dancing with Ferraris, and that has gone down incredibly badly. So what's your advice post-COVID? I mean, how should these rich in public opinion be behaving?
Yes, it's a very good question, because I think in a way it's their fault that there is this extremely negative stereotypes and prejudice, because they don't fight against it. They don't do anything against it. They don't take part on discussion. They are silent. If you compare it with other minorities, look, for example, I give you an example, gay people. I'm now 63 years old, and I remember 50 years ago, the situation of gay people was so extreme
Really
negative,
bad, yeah.
Really a lot of negative stereotypes and prejudice. Today, here in Germany, it's not a problem. We had a major here in Berlin. He was gay, and he even claimed, I'm gay and I'm proud of it. And so you couldn't imagine that something like this would happen 30 or 40 or even 50 years ago. But what was the thing? That they started to fight for to explain who they are and to fight against stereotypes and prejudice. And black people do the same. And you have it with. You can learn it from all other minorities. Jewish people did it. They did something again. They did this research about stereotypes and prejudice, and they took part in discussion. But rich people are different in this way. They are silent. They are silent. They don't explain why they are important. Sometimes people ask me in interviews, why do you think, why do we need super rich people? And then I'm going to ask them, and I ask them, I will put the question in a different way. Why do we need successful entrepreneurs? Because it's a matter of fact that most rich people became rich as entrepreneurs. If you look at the list of the richest people in the world, number one with Jeff Bezos with Amazon, then Bill Gates with Microsoft, then Larry Page and Sergey Brin with Google, or Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook, and so on, or Warren Buffett with his investments. By the way, all self-made people. This is another prejudice that people will tell you, oh, today in the 100 years ago, 50 years ago, it was possible to be self-made, to make it by yourself. Today, they are all only heirs, but this is not true. There was an analysis by Forbes. You know, Forbes, they have this list of the richest people in the world and the United States every year, and they analyzed the list of 400 richest Americans. And in 1984, only 48% were self-made, 48%. Then 2018, it was 67% self-made. So, but the perception is the other way around. The perception is that today it's almost impossible to make it, but you see it. I mentioned all these people. These are all self-made people who are rich. And if you ask whether we need rich people, you should ask whether we need entrepreneurs or whether we need capitalism. And I believe in capitalism. I wrote another book. The title is The Power of Capitalism, because I think it's amazing, and a lot of people don't know it. If you see the fact that 200 years ago, before capitalism, 90% of the global population lived in extreme poverty, and today this rate has fallen to less than 10%. And what is even more important, half of this reduction happened in the last 35 years. And I think it's a great story. It's a great story for capitalism, this reduction of poverty that never happened before in history. And I think capitalism is, for a lot of people today, a very dirty word. But socialism, that socialism killed more than 100 million people in the last 100 years. Socialism has a good meaning for a lot of people, and capitalism is a bad word. And the rich people are only, this representative figures for anti-capitalists. And if they fight against rich people, in reality, they want to fight capitalism.
I think we're going to finish up now because I think we're running over time. But one of the things I see working in this industry is, in fact, most rich people, however we define them, have come from incredibly poor backgrounds, are very uneducated in academic senses, and in fact have had to make their way in the world through, and you mentioned the gay population, but in a way they've done incredibly well in hospitality because almost the rest of the world forced them into a different industry because they didn't approve of them 50 years ago. And in fact, sometimes success comes from adversity, which is what people don't understand about making money. And almost academic achievement very rarely, or a lot of the time, doesn't translate into incredible economic success.
A very good point. Let's have another talk. I know today we have no time for this. It was exactly the topic of my book, The Wealth Elite, because in my interviews, I asked them about their success at school and university on the one hand, and their financial success on the other hand. And I saw that there was absolutely no connection. There were other things that they learned outside school or alongside school that were much more important than things they learned at school. Very important topic. I agree absolutely.
Well, it's been an amazing chat. Thank you so much, Rainier. Thank you so much for joining us. And we wish you namaste, a good day. And we look forward to meeting you post-COVID. So readers, don't forget, please, if you're still here, press the thumbs up and subscribe. And we look forward to seeing you on Friday at 11 a.m. as usual. So thank you so much, Rainier.
Thank you. I appreciate it.